Come on in. We're going to start this thing off. It's going to be a short one today. Got a busy schedule. Got a meeting in a little bit, so got to run through this. But there's so much going on. In fact, hey Mario, one thing that we need to work out is if I want to do one of these things without you, you can't make it or something. Um, we got to figure out how to do that because it was easy back in the old days. I could just jump on Periscope, put my phone up, and boom, I'm on live. It's easy. But when we have this, it's a little more complicated, right?
Yeah, a little, but it's nothing hard. You can handle it.
Okay. Yeah, let's see if we can't figure it out. Because I'd like to be able to jump on there because there's so much going on. And hold on, let me see what it's complicated. You got to have multiple things happening. So come on in, everyone. Let's chat about this. I have been a busy man over the last few days. I think I've had seven media appearances, all local in San Francisco um, since Thursday. Thursday, yeah. Just because people are talking about what happened on on Wednesday. Um, but then and then on top of it, then what happened on Friday. So for those of you who haven't been aware of this, okay, obviously we had the incident at the Capitol building on Wednesday, and then on Friday um, we had what I'm sort of referring to as Massacre Friday. We had a massacre of people getting shut out of social media, people specifically on the right, people who might be perceived as Trump supporters, just people on the right, people losing, you know, huge percentages of their followers on the different platforms. So, like, I mean, I've lost, the 20% of my followers certainly since election day, but specifically like Friday, I went out play golf on Friday afternoon. And it was a quick round. We got it done in about 3 hours and 20 minutes. From the time that I teed off until the time we finished, I lost 3,000 followers, um, and a lot more than that. I mean, I saw Dinesh D'Souza lost hundreds of thousands of followers. So Christy Swanson lost 100, and I think she said 150,000, like a third of her followers. Tracy Beans. Now I've talked to Tracy. I had a conversation with her. I want to say about a little more than a year ago or so, right around a year ago. And Tracy has a podcast. Actually, I spoke with her. I didn't know anything about her. She was calling me about something that was going on in an election up here. But my wife was like, "Oh yeah, I like Tracy Beans. I follow her. She's not crazy controversial. I mean, she's a bit of a Trump supporter, big following though. I mean, she's lots of people listen to her podcast, and she has like, I don't know, 500,000 followers, kicked off Twitter. I think the suspension is permanent. I don't know what she said. I mean, I follow her. I never see anything that controversial on there. I mean, she's not rough, particularly rough. I don't think she's kind of level-headed, loyal to Trump, but really not much more going on than that. And she's gone. I mean, she's off. Of course, we saw Trump got booted off, and he has one of the biggest followings on Twitter, and that's problematic in and of itself. But what's happening now with Parler, being kicked off of Amazon Web Services, so now you can't even go to Parler. Gab hasn't been in the App Store for a long time. But just before we were going to come on, I saw Ron Paul. Ron Paul, who's a gentleman and not even terribly confrontational. Ron Paul, who got basically, I'm sitting here now talking about politics because of Ron Paul. I got involved in his campaign and got inspired by him back in 2007, and he can't, like, I don't think they deleted his page from Facebook, but it's a weird thing. Like, he can't manage they can't manage his Facebook page. What the hell could Ron Paul have said that would be perceived as violent? I mean, all they're doing when they're kicking guys like him off is just fueling conspiracy theorists and fueling conspiracy theories, because there's no reason. This guy's so, erudite and thoughtful. I mean, he goes against the standard mainstream narrative. But is that where we're going now, where you can't go against the standard mainstream narrative, or you're going to be and we're going to be gone? Yeah. So anyway, trolls are in line. So be patient or go away. If you don't want to listen to me, then screw off. So this is obviously a massacre in a bad situation. And so with the mainstream media, the local mainstream media was asking me was about should Trump be should he be impeached? Should they use 25th Amendment? They didn't want to talk about social media. I kept bringing that up. And then specifically last night, I had an interview with the local NBC affiliate, the third one in the last few days with them, three different reporters. And a couple of those are really interesting. This guy's been, this reporter's been good with me in the past, and I like him. And I'm sure he's got his own questions, and I think he probably gets some questions from the producers. And one of the things that he kept referring to last Wednesday was calling last Wednesday an insurrection, which I find hilarious. And if you look at my Twitter feed, you'll see what I think about that. I mean, you have the guy with the Viking horn and the fur, and a bunch of a hodgepodge of people in there, roaming the building. Maybe they vandalized and broke some things. But if that's an insurrection, it's like the lamest insurrection of all time. I mean, an insurrection is something a little more substantial than that. People are armed and they go in mass and they have specific targets and they're doing specific things. These were people who were in there just to get. Well, listen, I don't know what they were in there for, truth be told. I was on the second that they started getting aggressive around the Capitol, I was on Twitter saying, get out of there. You're not helping. This is not a good thing. I just, I don't know what their point was. So I asked them to please not use that word insurrection around me. But then I'm seeing like some Republicans are using the word insurrection. A former chairman of the California Republican Party was using the word insurrection. I mean, people just getting a little out of control. It certainly wasn't, and it's not helpful to use that word. And we are. It's also a diversion from where we're going now. I mean, the big story is that's a minor act of vandalism, especially after what we've endured all year, all summer, watching billions of dollars in property damage, fires, and murders, and assaults, and all that sort of thing. To say that these people came in and did something that was, it's government property. I get the symbolism of it, but this was a minor episode. And it's also an enormous, enormous distraction from what's happening with the massacre of social media right now for folks on the right. This is a bad situation with the right, and it's not going to go. I mean, I be careful about what I say here, but let me just say this: can't think of a situation where people's points of view were cooped up, and that led to a long-term winning situation for everyone. Let's just put it that way. So, media is blaming Trump. They want to blame Trump for what for what happened on Wednesday. I'm going to come back to that in a second. But let's assume for a second that we can blame Trump. Is Trump the only person responsible for what happened? I don't think he is. By the way, I'm going to make a comment about him in a second. But let me ask you this: I can recall. We're supposed to have a government that works, gets along, it's oppositional, sometimes a little confrontational, but at some point they lay down the figurative weapons, and they get to work and they do things. And in order to do that, there's got to be a certain level of civility. And I can think of episodes and instances where Trump was civil towards Nancy Pelosi. I mean, there's no love lost there. That's all well and good. All well known, but there's no mystery to that, but specifically after the Democrats won the House, Trump congratulated Pelosi, said if she didn't have the votes to be Speaker, he would get them from the Republican side, And Pelosi, basically told him to go pound sand. But let me ask you this: can you think of, since Donald Trump was elected, can you think of a moment where she offered any kind of civility towards him? Any at all? And in fact, she is, effectively, she's a leader of her party. She's the because of her leadership in her party, and her party controls the House. That makes her the person responsible for the House's agenda. Okay, get all that. But in that regard, when you take on that responsibility, you also have to have some connection to the fact that you are also representing the entire American people, right? So the fact that Nancy Pelosi never once offered any level of civility, all she kept doing was turning up the heat in that relationship. She clearly has contempt for the president. The president has been held in contempt by other people in the past, and has managed to found relationships that work, and found friendships out of that. I can't think of a circumstance where that's true of Nancy Pelosi. She holds the grudge to the grave, it seems like, because she does not. I can't think of a circumstance where she's had a disagreement with somebody and then sort of backed off and said, okay, well, we can work together. Doesn't seem like she's capable of that. And by doing that, she dismisses the concerns of the American people. Something funky happened in this election. 30% of the Democrats believe that. 70% of Nancy Pelosi's own party believes that. So if that's the case, then is she helping by sort of dismissing those people? Is she helping right now by compounding a bad situation, compounding what happened on Wednesday? No. So in some regard, I'm going to say something. I hold all of them, all the leadership responsible to the extent that they have not been able to be professional and work with one another. But Nancy Pelosi said awful things about Donald Trump before he even said anything back to her. She said terrible things about him, and she's continued to say. I mean, she talked about his weight. She never called him the president. She called him the current occupant of the White House. These are all incredibly disrespectful things. What does she expect is going to happen from that? And what is she saying to the 75 million people, all the people who voted for him and put him in office? It's unbelievably provocative, and she's looking for a fight. So she fueled some of this frustration. She fueled some of this anger. She deserves some of the responsibility for what happened on Wednesday. And I know that's sort of like a different take on it, because I haven't heard anybody else say that, but it's true. I mean, she's been in a leadership position for a very long time in Washington, D.C., and people are frustrated. During the time while she's been in a leadership position, she gave rise to Donald Trump because of the people who have been left behind with all of the things that have happened with our global trade deals, the hollowing out of our industrial base in the United States, all those jobs that employed people across the Midwest. The policies that she sort of cemented, if she didn't invent them, led us to a point where somebody like Donald Trump came along and said, I'm going to speak on behalf of you because people like Nancy Pelosi are not. And so even in that regard, in sort of the long game, she held some responsibility. But in the shorter term, during Trump's presidency, she has done nothing but turn up the temperature. She has done nothing but fuel the fire of anger towards Washington, D.C. So, when you get a crowd of 500,000 people who show, and that's just, by the way, that's just my guess. I've heard different numbers, but that just sort of seems like, when I look at the size of that crowd, it seemed big. Like 500,000 is probably the number. Could have been more. But when you get, a few dozen people, maybe 100, call it 200 people out of that crowd who, went into the building and got out of control. I don't know. In some ways, does she deserve responsibility for that happening? Hell yeah. She's been turning up the heat for years, and I'm glad that no one got hurt. Well, I'm glad that no one in Congress got hurt. I'm mortified by the people who did get hurt and the people who died. But Nancy Pelosi needs some blame. So anyway, let's switch over to Donald Trump. So one of the things that I've been saying this weekend, in fact, there's a local station here, KRON, used to be an NBC affiliate. It's now independent. I was actually live with them in the 9 o'clock hour on Thursday, I think it was. Yeah, Thursday. And in that one, they asked me if I thought the president, deserved responsibility, and I said no, no, because he didn't tell people to do that. In fact, Jonathan Turley, who's the law professor at George Washington, very measured guy, very fair guy, and by the way, I think a Democrat. Always, but has it seems to me like a very sort of libertarian view of the function and the structure of the United States government. Gets that part of it, is an unrelenting supporter of free speech. Jonathan Turley, who was very critical of Donald Trump, went back through and looked at the speech and actually saw where he said. In fact, there's a video up there now that's been isolated. In fact, Mario, maybe tomorrow we'll put that up. The video of Donald Trump specifically saying that we peacefully organize and we're peacefully protesting. He used that word very carefully, and Jonathan Turley, who many of you've seen on TV, said, he said this, and I'm going to back off my blame on him because he doesn't deserve that. But let me be a little bit critical of the president. Something I wouldn't do on TV in a short time. We have to deal with the problem of concision, as Noam Chomsky calls it, in terms of television. If I was, let's just say this: if I was Donald Trump, or if I was Donald Trump's speechwriter, I would have been explicit about I would have spent 30 seconds, a minute, talking about how we are peaceful and we don't do that kind of thing. And I know that on the War Room, Raheem Kassem has been showing that the agitation around the Capitol building started before Donald Trump even finished his speech. So there's no way that there could have been a connection. Those people who showed up were looking for a fight. They were looking for trouble. Okay, so be it. But history will sort that out. But in the short term, we have another problem, which is the continued disruption of a possible second impeachment, which I'll also get to in a second. And to cover himself, Donald Trump should have spent some time. His speechwriter should have put it in. Maybe he did. Maybe Trump edited it out. But someone along the line should have been very explicit about that, because there was nothing good that came from violence. And I don't want to mind read Donald Trump. Let me say this. I think that Donald Trump is interesting. One of the techniques that makes him interesting is that he knows how to walk the line to say, did he mean that or did he mean that? And so that his supporters defend him, saying, no, he couldn't have meant that. And his detractors say, oh, he meant to do this bad thing. And there are certain circumstances, I'm not going to get into it. You can think of it yourself. He walks that fine line, and I don't think it's by mistake, because he's done it multiple times. And he gets that. And it's one way of getting people to talk about him on a regular basis, because he's walking that fine line. And I just wonder, I'm not suggesting anything, I'm not going to accuse him of anything, but I wonder if walking that fine line is something that he was doing here. So he made the mention of being peaceful in his speech, but didn't pound it enough. Because look, maybe he wanted to send a message to the Capitol, people in the Capitol. I would hope that's not the case, but I will say that if it was done because he misread the situation, or if he overlooked spending more time on the peaceful aspect of the rally, then it was a real mistake. That was a really big mistake. He should not have let that go by. I can't imagine that it was an unconscious mistake, but it certainly was. And look, I think that sort of moving on, and this is what I was going to mention earlier, something I wanted to get back to. I think what's happening in D.C. this week is more D.C. theater, more Washington theater. I don't expect. Look how long it took for the articles to get from the House to the Senate, where it was ultimately voted down, and that whole trial and everything that happened. I just don't think that it's going to happen. Now, maybe Pelosi can force it through, rush it through, There seems to be some flexibility in terms of voting rules with proxies and that sort of thing. So maybe they can get enough people in there to go ahead with an impeachment. Um, doesn't seem like procedurally like the Republicans can stop it on the one hand. On the other hand, I just don't. I mean, I don't think anything is going to come of it. It's certainly not going to pass in the in the Senate, and in that regard, it's kind of a futile exercise. It's also a destructive exercise in that is that really is that really going to help pull us together? Isn't that more the same dismissiveness aimed at Trump supporters by going down the path of a second impeachment? So I think that it's probably not going to go anywhere. I suspect that they won't get the vote done. They might, but probably not. But it's certainly not going to get into the Senate. And if they do go to the Senate, it'll just get dismissed. I think one problem with the outcome here is that if Donald Trump was interested in running in 2024, and they never say never, but I think it's going to be really difficult for him to do that now after what happened the other day. So, thanks. Yep, thanks. Guys, hold on a second. My Mac is about to run out of battery, and I got to get it charged up. I forgot to plug it in. So, I think that that now his prospects for 2024 are severely diminished, if not down to practically zero. Good catch there, Mario. Appreciate that. So that's one of the sort of the practical outcomes. And in the future, I'm going to just sort of finish up with this. I'm going to take a look at some of your comments here. But one of the lessons from Trump, I think that one of the things that was refreshing about him that made us all so excited about him was that he pushed back. He didn't take crap from people. And spoke to the DC establishment, who pretend that they are our betters, in a way that they let them know that we are onto their nonsense, and we're not going to put up with it. I think it was really unbelievably refreshing, and it was important because you need to sort of establish, Trump represented in a way the people in the middle of the country, and maybe even in the middle politically, against the coastal elites who mock the people who are in the middle of the country. It's a kind of a broad swipe at this, but that's sort of one way of looking at it. And he pushed back, and he pushed back hard. I think that where he might reconsider when this is all looked back on, when the post-mortem is done on the Trump presidency, if this is the only term, that there may have been opportunities for him to extend olive branches to people so that he could achieve his objectives, because there's many interesting things that he achieved. Many of the many good things he achieved, he certainly left a whole hell of a lot on the table. We still effectively have, and the biggest problem is, still effectively have a very powerful and in control deep state, and he really didn't make a dent in that. I see. People like John Brennan on Twitter, sort of gloating, and why John Brennan is, not on trial or in jail or something like that is beyond me. All those guys, and it's not just the former deep state, guys, but the guys who are currently there, and so there's a huge missed opportunity, and maybe had the olive branch has been extended. Like, for example, here's something you could have done. Let's say when Pelosi attacked him, he could have said, in one of in a public, in a press conference or something like that, when someone said Pelosi said this terrible thing about you, instead of taking the bait, he could have just said, well, listen, that's regrettable. I wish you wouldn't say that. We have to work. We should be able to work together. It makes it more difficult to work together when she says things like that, but I'll just, I'll leave her to be the judge of what she thinks is appropriate or not. Just say that. And it makes her look terrible. it makes her look like the bully that she really is. I mean, I hate to use that word because people overuse it. But Nancy Pelosi runs roughshod over people, and here she was she's way out of line, and he had every opportunity, or he had that opportunity to give her enough rope to to hang herself, and he didn't do it. So anyway, I just think there's a lesson there. You have to. It's important. He's got a principle, and that's one thing about Trump, for better or worse. He has a principle, and he just uses it to death. You saw it in the debates with Joe Biden, where he realized that you got to rattle Joe Biden, because Joe Biden's used to sitting in the basement, right? And he's been coddled. And Trump, that was a great thing. But also with Joe Biden, he's a guy who's makes unforced errors all the time. It's his nature. He just can't help but put his foot in his mouth. There's that old line, he only opens his mouth to change feet, right? So, what you do is you put the pressure on Joe Biden, and then you back off him and let him talk. Let him feel the pressure and try and do it. But when you just keep applying pressure over and over and over again, you don't give him enough time to make the mistake. As you saw, by the way, particularly in that first debate, Trump, at the end of the debate, Biden started saying the dopey things that he's known for. And it could have been better had Trump stopped that technique of pressure early on. So in any event, we'll talk more over the future live streams about lessons to learn from the Trump presidency. I still think he's done some really amazing things, moved the ball forward in so many ways for us. His sort of general America First approach to politics is going to loom large and hang over any future presidencies for probably a generation. Certainly, the Biden administration is going to have to look backward as soon as he does some sort of a deal with China on something, or allows something to get away, or has people coming across the border. People are going to be like, "What about America? What about?" And the media. It's going to be tough for the media to ignore that. So Trump's going to loom large over. The behavior of Washington and its in future administrations for some time to come, and that's all good stuff. But there will also be some lessons of missed opportunities as well, which we'll discuss in future live streams. So with that, let me just take a quick look at some comments here. Parlor is a trap. Gas is a secure service. Also, we don't know. Snoring. Go away then. Confused again. These are all nonsensical things. This is a comment. All right. Well, listen.